order. And first thing we would do would be to approve the minutes of October 7th, but I haven't seen them yet. So I think we'll defer that agenda item to our next meeting and possibly do the meetings of the 7th and also the 21st then. So my announcements are just confirming our next meetings, which are November 4th in 2 weeks, and then November 18th in 4 weeks, both at 3 p.m. And we do have a public forum scheduled for December 2nd at 7:30 in the evening. And thanks to Jeremy, that's been posted. So I wanted to first start with.
Is the December 2nd going to be Zoom, or do we have to do that in person, or what?
I think it's Zoom.
Okay.
I think until further notice, it's all Zoom all the time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So at one of our November meetings, or both of them, maybe we'll talk a little bit, or we'll do some planning, pre-planning for that public forum. And in addition to planning for our presentation, we'll also do a little bit of planning for outreach. So how we're going to entice people to join us and give us some feedback. So as you all know, I made a brief presentation to the FinCom on October 8th, and I sent you all my notes from that. And I felt that that was a useful conversation. There was some other follow-up information that came from that FinCom meeting. Phil Swain sent some draft information that the FinCom had proposed to the select board about a capital planning task force or standing committee. So I sent that around to you all. So we'll probably focus in on some of that later in the meeting today. So our main focus today was to be reports and discussion of the various elements that we talked about 2 weeks ago. And I think that the current capital planning process was to be presented by Stephen and Laurie and Carrie and Jared. And I wonder if you all had a chance to put your heads together about that, or
not the way we should have, probably. No, we didn't. I'm going to own that.
Okay, so
that doesn't mean we can't speak to it, Elise. So I guess it's kind of what purpose you want to have without something formal to present. We can certainly talk more on how it happens at the town and the school. So it really is what you want to use the meeting time for.
Okay, well, let's just think together about that. So there's the sort of firming up our understanding or an articulation of the current planning process. We wanted to, I do have feedback from Kate Hanley about the list of criteria, so we could have a look at that. We do have some information, suggestions for the pros and cons of a standing committee, both from Terry and from Parashar. We may think about the recommendations of the 2002-2003 facility planning report, and whether there are elements of whether we think that those recommendations still are valid, or if there are adjustments to those that we would want to consider. And the best practices from other towns, what we learned. I think that I'm not sure that we have much new information to discuss about that, but we may get to that. So I guess perhaps we should use the Kate Hanley's feedback on our criteria list as our warm-up activity for reminding us what we're all doing here together. So I did send this around.
What's it entitled? I'm not sure.
Well,
I see.
so it is an email from me.
Yes.
And then reply, yes. Okay,
That was probably sent around the 10th of October. No, let's see,
there we go.
maybe the 15th of October. I sent Kate Hanley our draft criteria, our project evaluation criteria, and asked her for her feedback. And she, mostly I wanted to be certain that we aligned our project criteria with the town's sustainability and plan and climate plan. And so she reminded me that the Sustainable Concord Plan has 3 leadership priorities: governance, which specifically calls for integrating sustainability into the capital planning process. And then she had some suggestions about the language of the criteria. So tell me, did you see this email, or shall I try to resend it?
I don't recall it, but that doesn't mean I didn't see it.
Elise, would it be helpful if I just shared it or you shared it on the screen? So
Yeah.
folks can-
I've
Yeah.
got it here, but yeah.
That'd be
Right.
great.
And
Parashar,
it's
are you able to do that?
It's
Yeah.
also one of the attachments. When Elise sent the agenda, it's one of the attachments.
Oh, okay, then I can find it.
Okay, great. That's wonderful. Thank you. So I think if you scroll down, you'll we can see Kate's comments. Yeah.
Would you like to just take over control?
Let's just take it. Let's just well, all right. Sure. Well, I think let's see. I think you need to control it probably.
Yeah, I'm going to give you control right now. There you go. You've got control.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so she suggests
She's talking about aligning with the Sustainable Concord Plan.
yeah, she is. Yeah.
We come up with a new plan every couple of years.
Well, so I think from the standpoint of our criteria, the greenhouse gas reduction goals and climate resilience goals in the climate action plan and Sustainable Concord are likely to stick around for a while. So relative to item number 3, Kate suggests that we reframe that to identify how a project takes into account climate projections, or if the project will improve resilience.
I'm sorry, item number 3 of what? Are you talking
this
about the one
criteria.
that's on the screen now?
Yes. Does the project support the town's ability to respond to environmental threats and emergencies?
Okay, all right, thank you.
So I think she feels that that's too general, and that we should be seeking descriptions of the project, the criteria for how it will take into account climate projections or improve resilience.
And how does that fit with number 4 then?
So she recommends that number 4 be more specific, and that there should be a criteria that specifically addresses greenhouse gas reductions, or reductions in greenhouse gas emissions community-wide. So in some respects, both of those issues are sustainability issues, their resilience, their carbon emission issues, energy issues. And because the Concord Municipal Light Plant has in its strategic plan to improve the renewable resources that generate our electricity, we all benefit from that, from the beneficial electrification of, and so I think that these criteria are just, should be designed to confirm that a project is not only seeking to benefit from the greenhouse gas emission reduction from our electricity, but also taking specific steps to reduce carbon from other fuels.
So Elise, I think that Kate's suggestions are really good. But I'm not sure about the ranking. It might be sometimes that sustainability is the third most important thing, and maybe another project funding, a number 7, or phasing, or stakeholders is more important. So I'd be comfortable changing the wording, especially if it doesn't say ranked at the top.
Yeah, the ranking, okay, yeah. Well, so what do people think? Should we be considering these criteria as a ranked evaluation, or just as filters for descriptors on the projects?
I prefer the latter, the filter. I mean, you know, one project may have these things ranked in a different order from another,
Right, okay.
and be no less environmentally responsible.
And I would tend to agree because I think some of the criteria here are a little bit mixed categories in my mind. It's not clear whether, if the answer to some of this is no, what the implications are. And so, you know, maybe perhaps this is a list of criteria that ought to be considered as the town, the schools are in the process of proposing very large capital projects and discuss it in whatever presentation proposal package is put together, versus things that are used to filter out a project.
I agree totally.
Can I ask you a question? How was this ranking developed? Was this developed by the committee last year or something, or?
Yes, last spring.
No, as I recall, this is a draft that I think Stephen put together based on Long Meadow. And I don't remember that the committee really discussed it. I might have slept through that. I don't know. Does anyone else remember us discussing?
So Stephen presented a list of criteria, and the committee added to it and modified it.
Yeah.
And
then the ranking,
was, we actually did not discuss, my recollection is we did not discuss whether the ranking, whether we would use these criteria as ranking or not.
okay, yeah. Yeah, because yeah, I think, yeah, it's a kind of a subjective, at least in the first look at it, which one is, you know, what the ranking should be, yeah.
So our charge asks us to recommend policies and practices to ensure that capital planning takes into account climate impacts. And so that was the reason that this list of criteria was developed. So I think that was originally considered to be a set of filters for capital planning.
But these don't all have fundamentally, environmental impacts. I mean, the impact for, I guess, for employees or legal mandates. I mean, they're not necessarily fundamentally environmentally oriented.
Yeah, no, nor are they designed to allow or disallow a project. But I think that, that we might say that if a project came forward and it did not take into account greenhouse gas emissions or preparedness or energy and water savings and that sort of thing, would that be a project that we would want to recommend? Probably not.
Well,
Four is up, number 4 is up there. I mean, it's, yeah.
Right.
That's basically saying precisely that.
Yeah.
I mean, I would look at it a little bit differently. I mean, consider a project like building a new middle school. It's not whether we build a new middle school or not, but how can we best make the middle school satisfy these, some of which are in conflict with each other, possible conflict with each other.
Right.
Yeah,
But these are
That's
not
why
evaluation criteria for the project. They're goals that the project should follow or strive to.
or perhaps discuss, these ought to be considered, and then really up to the town through town meeting, ultimately, if either the schools and or the town believe, or the select board believe it ought to be put to town meeting, you've got information. But should they really be filters? I mean, automatic filters? I would think not. I mean, it takes away the judgment of the schools and the towns if we make them automatic filters, in my opinion.
Right, like there could be projects for which 7 of these filters totally apply and the other 3 don't even apply. Like, for example, even number 3 and 4 might not even apply for a project like, let's say, purchasing land. When we purchased the Balls Hill, I mean, maybe in an indirect way that's helping advance our sustainability goals, but I think that's really what number 3 and 4 are about. So it's not all projects are going to have a yes or no answer. They might be neutral on some of the criteria.
And I'm actually struggling with this with the schools, just because on any given year we have, give or take, $900,000 of capital money under the town manager's budget. And that can be made up of anywhere from 3 to 10 potential projects. Every year we update our 5-year capital plan. The one that we're doing right now is the ERUs at 2 of our middle schools. So now, once the new middle school is built, all of our schools are going to be fairly new. The capital projects that we're going to have, for the most part, are going to be for upkeep. So I'm struggling with some of the, just trying to compare some of our projects.
I wonder if this is really meant to be it's their evaluation criteria. So like if you're going to buy a new car, you may look, does it have leather seats, but, okay, but that's not going to be the make or break it thing. I mean, you might buy a car that doesn't have leather seats.
Also,
these are just things that you should be looking at.
also the projects that you mentioned.
Sorry, excuse me just a minute. I'm not sure that Jared finished. And so I want to just give you a chance to say, what is it about this list of criteria that is would be difficult from your perspective for the school capital?
Right. Well, just that. So if we're putting together, like I said, we already have our 5-year capital plan. And just to go back to the previous, what I do is Kerry and I usually talk about, what what budget the town manager has for a capital plan. We put it together, you know, in the early winter, go through the school committee and everything, and then it goes to town meeting. Will each one of our projects, if the town manager says that we get 900,000, go through this draft
No.
criteria?
No,
No, this would
No.
only be applied to the large projects.
Okay,
Tier one
Be-
projects.
so like a school.
Well, projects that would not fall, that would not fall within the town manager's budget.
So in other words, the very large projects, right? Anything
Right.
above 5 million as we've defined it is what this applies to. Okay.
Exactly
Perfect.
right. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, you did say that last meeting. My apologies, my head was spinning a little bit.
No, it's no apologies. It's all good conversation and reality check, I think. So
Are-
I think the list of criteria, and Terry, I'm going to come back to you in just one second. I think this list of criteria is sort of one of our test drives for how we might consider prioritizing projects. And so we should consider whether we think a list of criteria is a valid way of prioritizing, but whether or not we have the right criteria. So Terry, I interrupted you before, so come back to you.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I cut you off, Jared, because this was, I was just going to say that it's only for the very large projects.
Great.
But I'm glad that came up because I think that's good preparation for us as a committee for the public forum. I think we will get that type of question, and we will have to keep reminding people that our committee is only for the very large projects.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And at least to start answering your question in my mind, you know, as I think a little bit about this, for very large projects, I would assume if we have a list of criteria like this, I would imagine that the schools, the school board, the town manager, the select board would use these criteria in essence to try to determine whether to even propose something to town meeting. And if they did, presumably this information would be available to the citizens so that they can make their votes and decisions in full context. I have a hard time struggling with a ranking for two reasons. One is, you know, depending on what the projects are, you might give different weight to different elements. But even more importantly, probably, I mean, how many very large projects are going to go before town meeting at during the same year? I mean, a ranking implies you're asking the voters, picking what, you know, prioritizing the dollars one over the other. And if that's the case, how often have we had very large capital projects come up, more than 5 million total, in any one year at town meeting?
In fact, the question is, how many do we have big projects coming up in any 5 years? For that,
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think these are not so much criteria, but these are considerations that a committee proposing a project has to be able to address to the town. And it's not a particular order, they just need to address all of these issues. So if a group is presenting a new middle school or a new police fire station, you know, they have to be able to say to the public, you know, are all these things satisfied? And then more. What are the projects doing?
We're irrelevant, right? Because some of these elements may not be relevant in certain situations. Yeah, I agree with you. That's the way I would lean.
Okay, so it sounds like we need a little refinement of the criteria, that we would consider them, that maybe we would call them capital project considerations,
Yes.
and that without a ranking.
Yeah, it's take off the ranking thing off.
Yeah,
Otherwise, whatever. Again, they're just, a checklist of before you go out the door with it, you should check all these boxes.
Right.
Most of all, remember, bring your map.
good. All right. Let's move, thank you, Parashar, for sharing that screen. Let's move on to the pros and cons of a standing committee. I'm going to see if I can get to.
Here we go.
Please, before that one, I would recommend we go to the other table that I shared, just sort of before the pros and cons of a committee, just the different
Yeah,
considerations.
well, yeah, that's my my umbrella. Pros and cons of a standing committee, or maybe not the is not the right. Let's see. See if this is what we want.
Considerations. This is
Well, let me see. Here we go.
does this file have a name?
Yeah, this came as an attachment. I'm going to see if I can share this screen.
Are you talking about the file entitled Concord Permanent General Building Committee?
So this is what I'm. Can you all see this?
I can see
Yes.
it.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Now, this is Parashar's work. So Parashar, I'm going to give you the chance to discuss this, and maybe I'm not presenting. You sent two different files. So you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I think this is the right one to start with. So just for full context, right, at the last meeting, I think I raised my hand to develop potential pros and cons for a standing committee. And as I did that, and that was one of the tables I sent to Elise just as a first cut. But after I thought a little bit more about it, I said, that's probably not the right place to start, perhaps. And I sort of stepped back and I said, well, actually, the choice of whether or not to have a standing committee, et cetera, should probably be driven, or the governance of the process, in essence, should probably be driven by kind of what are we trying to solve, if you will. And so I went back and I looked at the charter, if you will, or the mission or the request that the select board made of the task force. And, as it says here in the quotes, in essence, we were asked to develop a process for townwide capital planning, and that would be used to develop a 10-year capital plan, et cetera, et cetera. And so, clearly we're not going to develop the first plan, but we're just developing the process by which the plans would actually be developed and maintained. And so in my mind, that meant that, plans have to be developed, submitted for approval. They've got to be updated. The process, the criteria, the considerations we just went through are ones we're developing now, but maybe 3 to 5 years from now, people may want to revisit it. They may want to assess how the process is working against what was originally envisioned, et cetera. So, and it was very clear from the charter here that we're looking only at very large projects and not the intermediate and large capital expenditures, which are funded within the levy limit. And so, okay, so if that's our task, and that's what we're trying to solve for, maintenance, if you will, of the process, the criteria, et cetera, are there any other things that we might want to consider for governance purposes? Should the public have an opportunity for input, for example? And, for example, and, Lori and Carrie and Jared shouldn't take any offense, but, town officials, schools officials can go through this and decide all this in a smoke-filled room without any public input. I'm not saying that's what happens, but that's certainly a design choice, for example. But so should there be an opportunity for public input? You know, should we try to strive for the meeting warrants to be more clearly communicated? You know, what is the role of residents in process maintenance, et cetera? And maybe what other considerations are there? So I sort of step back and ask myself these questions. And then in that light, Elise, if you advance to the next slide, I took a stab based on that as sort of as objective to, in essence, on the left-hand side, come up with some structures. And then not so much pros and cons, but elements to consider in light of some of those elements. And so the first structure is, you know, it's an advisory standing meeting. Most, maybe all the members are residents. Does it include a FinCom liaison? Those are all sort of questions. There are probably others. And I put down some considerations here for us to think a little bit about. You know, would this type of a structure provide additional opportunity for public input, for example? Certainly, it appears that it would add an additional layer to planning and approval. If in fact, for example, this is an advisory committee. One could have a committee that has full decision-making rights and is not advisory. And again, that's certainly an option to put out there. And I won't go through all of these considerations, if you will, but that's those are some considerations I thought of if you have a advisory committee that's mostly maybe all members of, you know, the town residents. The second
people like
structure,
who work for the town, who don't happen to live in town, like.
well, the first one is more like the finance committee, right? We're all town residents, period.
Yeah.
The second one is similar to what Westford has, the town of Westford, when they presented earlier, it's hard to believe it was earlier this year at the League of Women Voters Forum. They have a committee that actually, most of the members are actually town officials. It's the town department heads, school staff that are actually the members. It wasn't very clear in that presentation whether there was a resident member or not. Certainly we could add one or two or whatever. And then of course there are different considerations when you have that sort of committee. And this is what got me thinking a little bit, is if one were to look at that type of committee, you know, from our perspective as a town, Westford, when they developed that committee, said that helped them improve the facilitation of sharing needs and requests across departments. I don't know whether Concord has that need to address or not, for example, but you can see some additional considerations one would think about with that type of a structure, for a governance structure again. Another potential governance structure could be, you know what, our current processes work well for the small capital equipment, small capital projects, intermediate projects. Maybe let's take a look at that, enhance those processes for very large projects as well, and go with that sort of an approach for governance again. And so that's a little bit of the logic of how I sort of came up with some of these structures and considerations. And at least I don't think I have another slide. I think that was the end for this one, right?
It is for this one. There is another slide for a standing capital planning committee that we could go to. But
before we go there, I guess, you know, I did that one first, right? At least because I was on this notion of standing committee. The reason I did this is when I looked at the standing committee, I looked at Westford, it was kind of clear that the considerations of a standing committee would really be based, I think, on the composition. And you could have two sort of choices there. It could be advisory or it could be decision-making. And again, that leads you down a different set of considerations. So I thought it might be helpful for us to think a little bit about, first, broadly speaking, before we get into pros and cons, what type of governance structures we think we ought to explore in a little bit more detail. And then we can go into considerations for each of those governance structures, we might have some that we just want to put aside right off at the beginning. So
Yeah.
I'll shut up now
So-
and be very interested in what people, what folks thinking, what people think.
So I want to thank you for laying this out. I think it's a good framework for our conversation. Terry, I see you want to,
Yes,
got an idea?
I like this framework too, and I think we might have a fourth option. I'm not sure if it's the third option or a modification of the third option, or there is a fourth option, but I seem to recall that Stephen and Lori were talking about right before COVID happened. So we didn't flesh it out enough, but something about the school has their priorities, the town has their priorities, and then the superintendent and the town manager sit in a room and somehow they take that criteria and they figure out what to do. And then what? Like, we didn't really finish discussing it, but I see it as a fourth option here. And
Terry, let me interrupt. That was the third option there that I was thinking of, because I heard that that had happened. And
Okay.
so what you see is
So
the third row
enhancing-
may not happen. So
Getting
that's the
some sort of a
third
hybrid.
option, right?
well,
Because
okay, if I could just comment about that, I kind of see the third option then is maybe a 3A and a 3B. One is, some people say what we're doing now is working fine. So that could be option 3. And then option 4 would be to modify what we're doing now, enhance it. Because I don't think that what we're doing now is completely addressing everything that we need. And I just want to make one more comment about it. I'm one of the people who came into this really believing that we needed a standing committee, because I couldn't figure out any other way to have a formal process. However, this option, if we could flesh it out, might provide that formal way of doing it, and without having the disadvantages. You know, I don't want to have the discussion yet, but I'm just saying that it opened my mind to the possibility of it. So I would just like to see that third option sort of split into, one is what we do now, and one is let's enhance it and solve the problems that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, Terry. And you know, where I came at it was the 3A, like use the current process. That was one of those I just put that aside. But
Right.
we should put it up there formally, and that's something certainly we can go with. I thought, based on the previous discussion, that had almost implicitly been put aside because Steve and Lori were going to come up with some modifications, but we can certainly put it up there formally. And then this in essence is what was discussed pre-COVID. So happy to add a fourth row to stay with the current process.
okay, thank you.
Unmodified.
So Laurie and Carrie and Jared, do you have any thoughts or comments about this?
I do. I think as I've listened and processed over these last bunch of months, and certainly talked with Stephen and Carrie and Jared, obviously, because it's from each side that we come together, and really reflected on what currently goes on. And I know, you know, we kind of skipped over that piece of the agenda. We did talk a lot about it before we shut down last winter. So there are slides in some of our old material that outline the process from each direction. My worry about a standing committee is it may take away from where the current authority and communication is happening. And I'm just wondering if there isn't a way that maybe Terry's suggestion of a middle modified way of what we're doing now. How do we direct people to where the information already sits? Because the school committee is having enormous amounts of conversation about all of these big projects long before they become anything. The middle school is a great example of that. The town's doing the same thing. Anything the schools propose ends up at the select board and through the finance committee. I just think maybe we're missing the communication vehicle that helps the general public who's interested know when and where those conversations are happening. And then because they've missed them, they're feeling surprised at town meeting. So my worry about another committee in the mix of all that is, well, one, it's another place to have to share the same information, but I almost wonder if it detracts from where the actual decisions are made, because I think you're right in the way that you outlined all this is advisory is just that. I don't know, I worry it might add one more piece that adds to the confusion rather than support the processes that are there.
Other thoughts?
So I never like having staff members on committees.
Yeah.
I don't know if Carl, if you were started to say something like this, but it always has felt awkward for me to be a staff member on a committee with residents, because as staff members at my level anyway, we're here to to put legs to what committees want to do. So it feels awkward there. And I also would be concerned about having an advisory committee to the town manager and the superintendent where they're making the decisions. I think you're sort of, a formal committee, I think you're sort of creating a tension point that maybe doesn't need to exist. Maybe there's a better way to get public input into it, more visibility into the process.
Ultimate decisions are made by town meeting. And isn't this committee basically something that is supposed to be, I guess, finding information and helping the citizens of the town, whether it be town meeting or select board and FinCom or some combination thereof, but it's an advisory committee to synthesize this information in terms of a long range looking at things. And that's the other thing, is that it's not going to be making the recommendation to town meeting, about 5 years ahead, a project 5 years ahead at this year's town meeting. But through the process of long range planning, this committee would have knowledge of these projects well in advance and be in a position to help the citizens of the town, I guess, basically. But I mean, it probably also gives the, the town manager and the school committee and school superintendent the ability to, kind of test out what some of the issues may be. Again, we're looking long range. So it's not, not just, and obviously this committee is not going to have, executive, say over things.
Yeah, so I think that's an important nuance, and it's clear in Parashar's presentation that an advisory committee does not have any authority. And I think making recommendations for a citizen committee to make recommendations to the town manager and the school board is a little, it's a little unusual, because the town manager and school board already report to governing bodies in the town. And they, in fact, have the responsibility and the authority to propose these projects to town meeting.
Well,
Lisa,
they
Lisa,
also-
Carl, can I just, don't take the words I put there literally, Elise, because one could easily have those recommendations delivered to the select board, right? I just put them there as ideas, right? But the general point is it would be advisory, right? To whomever.
That's because the
versus
finance
decision-making.
committee is advisory, and the town manager reports to the select board, but the finance committee, is looking at this stuff, and we only do it on a yearly basis, or did it when I was on it. But yeah, the finance committee looks into these things in detail and generally knows all the information and can synthesize the information. And I think, has, some service to the select board and the school board and the town manager, in terms of, what is the citizens' reaction to these things? What are the things that the citizens are looking at?
So I guess the
Say something.
one question would be, what kind of information would be helpful to the current process, current capital planning process? I mean, Laurie mentions a communication step or communication vehicle. The question is there a citizen layer to that, or is that, would public input be, would there be another venue for public input that we don't currently use that would be helpful?
So from my perspective, at least, to go back to what Carl said, I don't know that you need to have a committee to put together the plan, right? I mean, at the end of the day, we could have a requirement that basically says between the school board and the select board, they shall develop a 10-year capital plan. They shall update it annually. And so you end up with a document that's developed by those bodies and updated annually that
I
anyone
disagree
can go
with having
to.
that done without citizen.
Wait a second, let's let Parashar finish, okay?
Yeah, so they could, you could have the current process, they put together a 10-year plan, updated annually. It's the source, the Bible, if you will, that residents can go to get a sense of what's coming down the pike. And I think and look, and this is the question I asked, right? Like, what's the best approach? How do you get FinCom to weigh in on it? What type of public input do you want on that document? Or do we say, to what Lori was saying, the schools have a 5 or 10-year capital project list. I'm assuming they do.
Yep.
And again, if this is for very large projects for a minute, I mean, you could consolidate all of this, of course, to recommend we think everything should be on there.
The
And the
FinCom
town's
doesn't
probably
have
got
capital planning as part of their remit. They did at one time.
No, I'm talking about this group. I'm talking about this group. I'm talking
Yeah,
about
this-
our task force could recommend that. So all I was simply saying, Carl, is I personally don't think you need a standing committee to be able to have a document which people can go look at. I do believe a document that people can go look at and that gets updated is important and would be a good thing to have, regardless of how it's developed and who develops it.
So, is it fair to say that right now, the existing capital planning process does not include a separate forum for citizen input other than finance committee, select board meetings, school committee meetings? All of those are venues for public input.
But the finance committee does not look at a long-range plan. That at some point that was part of the finance committee's remit that got taken away at some point, a long time ago.
I guess Carrie and Jared and Lori, do the schools in the town, is there a document that if I were to go online right now, I could see what the list of capital projects are for the next 5 years that are approved even, or and maybe even ones that are under consideration, or is there no such list?
Yeah.
I'm just asking as a matter of fact.
There's one on our website under budget information.
Okay.
Every year we update it. We do a 5-year capital plan. So that's up on our website. I can send you all the link.
Are those approved projects, Jared, or are they ones
They
that
are
you're
now,
mulling?
they were approved at town meeting. So they are approved. Yep,
One fiscal year at a time, though. They're not approved.
correct.
I think that what Parashar is looking for is a list of very large projects that include both the town and the school.
Well, not only that, but just ones that are under consideration, because I think, Lori says all these projects and ideas are discussed at various forms, which I agree with Lori. I completely agree. However, there doesn't seem to be a document in my mind that says, hey, these are the ones under discussion in various stages. Doesn't mean they've been approved by any means, right? But these are here are things that might be coming down the pike that you, the citizens, may want to know about and be updated on.
So there isn't a consolidated list. The schools have their list and the town has their list, which is
Right.
part of my wonder if we had a master way for people to know when those items are being discussed, because right now they get buried in agendas for the various committees that already exist. But the lists, the projects exist, and from our side, it's small projects. We don't have any other big ones. The middle school's it. But they are, I'm sure they're on lists, just not all in one place.
So the town manager's 5-year plan does incorporate the school projects. But again, we're talking about the non-very large projects for the most part. The town 5-year plan does have some large enterprise fund projects on it related to the water enterprise. But we don't really have a very large project that we've plugged into the next 10-year span. We have projects under consideration or projects I think we would like to go forward, but there's no specific timetable. And, by that, I mean the public works facility and the public safety complex. These are ideas that are out there. There are some numbers associated with them, but there's absolutely no timetable associated with them.
And would you say that there's no timetable because it's imagined that those projects will be taken up on an opportunistic basis?
Boy, I don't want to answer that question. I don't know that there's I think, I think up until the time that the middle school project started moving again, I think we were thinking about proposing them at certain intervals, but once there was agreement that the middle school project was moving forward, those projects, talking about the timetable, really stopped.
Yeah, so I think that is in part the crux of the issue, because I think collectively we could identify a few large, very large projects that the town needs. And I'll just put one out there just for an example, and that would be a public facilities project. And that will have a big, cost. It needs a site. There are lots of complexities to imagining that project. And so, I think one of the sort of systematic ways that the town would benefit from thinking forward about large projects would be kind of meshing the large school projects and the large town projects, and imagining a sequence for them that would bring benefit in many sectors. And so it's sort of that kind of forward planning that would be helpful, even if we're not successful at developing a strategy for attaching a timeline to them. So, and relative to public input, I think it's fair enough for the citizens to, have access to that information so that collectively the citizenry isn't surprised. So how we could achieve that would be good. It is what a capital plan does.
Elise, I'm wondering if it might be useful for this group to discuss a specific scenario, a hypothetical scenario. Let's say it's the year 2025 and the middle school is already being constructed. And now we're considering the public works building, let's say the public safety building, and a large renovation to Ripley School. And something like that, that we have a scenario and we discuss how this is going to work. For example, if we go with the enhanced modified system that we have now, option 4, how would the superintendent and town manager get together? Would they recommend to the boards, or how would it exactly work? because I think that's where the hole is. I think if we have a specific scenario, let's just imagine we need a big renovation at Ripley School and we need the Public Works building and
You also need a fire station too.
yeah. So what would be the process to, who is going to meet and sequence these projects?
Well, and this is where I think we keep getting stuck, because
Right.
as the sitting superintendent, I will not ever be recommending that scope of work at Ripley.
Okay.
So I don't want us to get bogged in too many hypotheticals, although I see why you're asking all that. You know, you've served the town, the town has served the schools very well. The middle school is really the last piece, and we're going to be able to step back for a long time to come. I think that needs to be part of the you know, statement that gets made here. So I see why you bring it up, Terry. I just don't want us to spend time on something that I don't see happening and then anytime soon. And by soon, I mean 5-10 years at least.
Anything for Ripley is within the town manager's budget.
Correct.
So we projected out some asbestos abatement, some
Boilers.
boiler work,
Yeah.
but that's all going to be under the town manager's budget.
You're
Can I
right.
take
This
a-
is where we keep getting stuck. Yeah.
Can I take a stab at that? I'm going to go out on a limb. So the way I could envision this, and this is kind of what I was thinking about with that third row, option 4, whatever we want to call it. You've got the list that Jared mentioned, which is the small intermediate capital stuff. You've got the list that Carrie develops with the town department input with Stephen. At some point, they make it into the warrants today, right? And they go to town meeting. I was envisioning, and again, I don't know the details of all the intermediate steps, but I was envisioning that at some point before town meeting, those get put into one document. And, oh, by the way, that document also contains any very large project that might be going. But in that document, first and foremost, is a list of everything that's been, that people are considering, that 10-year horizon.
Mm.
And Lori, I understand that you don't want to talk too much about it because it's a hypothetical, but whether it's a, you know, modifications to Ripley or anything else, two fire houses that Carl wants, there would be a comprehensive list looking out 10 years.
Yep.
And then it's really the town and the school departments prioritizing which ones they're going to bring to that annual town meeting. And one of the questions I had is, do we want to build in a process for that presentation to occur to the public one time, twice, I don't know, before town meeting or not? But in essence, what I'm also suggesting, by the way, is we expand our scope a little bit and recommend to the select board that we need a process, a 10-year plan, not just for the very large ones, but for all capital projects. And then it's up to the town and the school departments through that regular process to decide which ones they're going to bring forward. We need to, I think, my opinion, figure out, I think the public should be given an opportunity to weigh in on that before it goes to town meeting. So Terry, I don't know if that helps answer your question, but that's kind of
Oh,
what
it
I was
does.
thinking in my mind.
It does. I just want to make one comment. This scope was very controversial at the select board. And and what you're saying, and to some extent I agree. I would not agree to put the tier 1 projects in, because I don't think that, personally, I don't think that town meeting should get involved in every cruiser that's purchased, in every computer and the tier 1. But I could see a number of tier 2s. I could see our scope, and so that this 10-year document included, let's say, the tier 2s and tier 3s. That might work.
Fair enough. And by the way, this is a joke, very clear. The US Constitution arose out of a convention that wasn't meant to throw away the Articles of Confederation either. not that we're developing the next constitution, but their mandate wasn't to do
Yes.
that either.
Okay, so I think it's maybe our next effort ought to focus on options for enhancing or modifying the current capital planning process. Does that sound right to everyone?
I don't understand that. I mean, you know, you can take any capital planning process and look at options for modifying it. But what is the point? I think that from the public's point of view, there are two different kinds of projects. Those that require debt exclusions and those that don't. For those that don't, the public's attitude is, you guys work it out. And that those that do require debt exclusions, those are the ones that need to be developed. We need to have fair warning that they're coming down the pike and so on. So a debt exclusion for the middle school will probably pass as long as the project is well drawn up and everything. It will take a lot of convincing for a debt exclusion for a new police fire station. In fact, I'm not sure it would pass. And then many other things, just projects that are normal part of governance, the part of everyday governance that we do all the time here in the town and that all towns do. So I'm not sure where I'm going with this thought, but
No, we're with you, I think. We
yeah.
understand that.
And
Okay,
the real threshold of the public is it a debt exclusion or not?
great.
Okay.
Well, I guess I have to say, Hugh, that that was true a while ago, but I think that things have changed recently because of the Giroux and White Pond projects. The public's threshold changed. We heard a lot of concern about phasing. And so the debt exclusion is not the only threshold. And that's why I think we came up with the
5 million.
and the phasing.
And I think the finance committee also is, would like, concern is the wrong word, but the notion that the intermediate projects, 2 or 3 million here or there, eventually do add up and affect the taxpayers. And so having some line of sight as to when those are coming would also be helpful for FinCom.
And additionally, there has been a facility plan that's been renewed. I'm not sure it's complete yet, but Stephen mentioned it at the FinCom meeting. I've not been able to find a draft of it. But it's the 29, it's the
PBA.
20, yeah, PBA. So it's a 2019 report, which updates or maybe preempts now the 2002 report. So the town and the schools own many, many facilities. And for there not to be some kind of forward-looking game plan for renewing those facilities is puts us in the position of an ostrich. And I think that is that's an aspect of capital planning also that should be considered. Whether those are possible projects that would come onto a 5 to 10 year list or not. But anyway, I think that that's another aspect of this.
Well, isn't making that choice part of capital planning, long-range capital planning? Making those
It is,
evaluations, whether they go on the list or not?
exactly. So, so perhaps we haven't had a full-blown conversation yet about whether a separate committee would be desirable. But today we focus primarily on modifying the existing capital planning process.
Well, Parashar, I mean, the first two things here are meant to be separate committees, right?
They are. Those two are meant to
Yeah.
be separate advisory committees. What I didn't put down is an option that's a separate committee with decision-making rights, which I felt was probably off the table anyway, so why bother talking about that?
So do we need like somehow to either detail these more and I guess sometime have to come to a vote on this? I mean, what we're going to recommend eventually, sometime before December?
So we have, we'll have a choice to vote for recommendations before we make a presentation to the public for their input, or we'll have an opportunity to present our considerations and collect public input and then take a vote.
Right.
Terry,
I have two comments. First of all, to what Carl just said, I would like to recommend that part of one of our meetings in November be kind of a rehearsal where we go through the slides, because when we tried that in February, we saw that we still needed a lot of work. I in particular am assigned to 2 slides that I have no idea what I'm supposed to be saying. So I think we're going to need a rehearsal. My other comment is that I was one of the people who volunteered along with Parashar to do pros and cons of the standing committee, which I did. And if you want to share my screen really quickly on that.
I will do that. Thank you.
Okay.
With a caveat on the really quickly part of that.
Right. Okay.
Hmm.
There it is. Okay. See if I can. There we go. Okay. Does everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay.
What's the top of the page?
Pros and cons of a standing capital planning committee. And what I did was I tried to consolidate things I've heard at these meetings with a letter from Jean Banfield and a letter from the League of Women Voters. And I would like to add in a number 5 that Carl mentioned today. But basically, the pros are everyone would clearly understand the process and when it happens. The committee would be most likely perceived as neutral and unbiased. The town would have a permanent committee, and their charge would include reminding everybody that we have a specific process and a specific capital plan, and I guess also a real document, a combined document. Without a standing capital committee, we have to figure out how do we develop a comprehensive plan? What is the process for recommending projects? How do we formalize or codify the process and explain it clearly to the public and make sure it's followed? And then the cons, somebody here mentioned any committee is only as good as the people serving on it. Sometimes capital committees get into the weeds and get focused on small projects. That's a big problem. And then we've also talked about what will the authority be? Is there going to be a lot of confusion and disagreement? And if the committee only recommends, who do they recommend to? Do they recommend directly to the town meeting? If they do that, are they overruling the town manager, the select board, the superintendent, etc.? So I just, I think I've emailed this to everybody, the summary, and it's probably not complete. So if you have some more pros or cons, I know Carl mentioned one today that I want to add. That a committee can help synthesize information and make decisions. So that'll be
Right,
number 5.
And Terry, you had an additional pro on the list that I circulated, which was regarding potentially large capital gifts to the town. The committee would recommend whether the town should accept such a gift. Yep.
So Terry, a con, I think, depending on how many members you are on the committee, and I'm assuming this committee would be town residents, is will you have enough volunteers serving on this committee? I know some of the volunteer committees have difficulty recruiting folks.
Right,
So that's a question, I think.
right.
Okay. Carrie, thank you. That's helpful to have those pros and cons in one place, and we can add to it and refine it as we go here.
There
So,
were, at least on the first table I sent you, there were some other pros and cons. Maybe we just consolidate them.
yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
All
I
right.
have to stop sharing. Okay, there we go.
Okay. So it's 4:15, and I'd like to propose that at our next meeting, we look at our draft presentation for the public forum, and we refine it. And one thing that we need from Laurie and Carrie and Jared and Stephen is a description of the current capital planning process. So I don't know if you want to go to the slides that we developed before and refine those. And do you have those? Would you like me to send that PowerPoint again?
That would be great if you would. I have them, but that would be
Okay.
faster.
All right.
Yeah, I
So
think
I'll
we'll go
send-
back to what we
Again, please,
started.
I've
and-
lost it.
Yeah.
I beg your
we'll-
pardon,
we'll work
you?
with-
Send it again, please. I've lost it.
Okay. So I will. I'll send that around. Because I think the more precise we can be about the current process, the better able we'll be to imagine enhancements to that or collect information about that. And one of the things about Terry, in your list, without a standing capital planning, number 4 in the pro column, without a standing capital committee, how do we actually develop a comprehensive strategic plan? Well, we have an active, effective capital planning process. And so what are we missing by sticking with it, essentially, is part of one of the aspects that would be worthy of a discussion. If we can identify what we think we're missing, then maybe we would have an idea about how we could fix that.
May I ask then, maybe that's what I have been assigned to 2 slides that are called transition that I don't understand. Whoever.
Okay, so I would encourage you not to focus on that.
Good.
Because those assignments are old news from my
Good.
perspective now, and that we should collectively reframe that presentation so that it makes sense to all of us, and then we can decide how we will organize the presentation on that.
Great, thank you.
So my bias for this public forum is to make a brief presentation and use most of our time to collect input from the public. That's what I'm most interested in doing. So we'll see if we'll see if anybody shows up, and then we'll see how much public input we can actually collect.
Do we have a date or a time forecast for this?
Yes, December 2nd at 7:30 p.m. So I will send the PowerPoint around again, and so we'll take the largest portion of our meeting next time to review that presentation, and if not do a rehearsal, at least get our content square.
And also,
okay.
maybe we could talk about how we can publicize and recruit people to show up.
Yes, exactly. Good. So now I would take public comment, and I don't know that we have any members of the public listening in or Zooming with us today. So all right. I appreciate all the effort that people have made. Has anyone seen the 2019 facility plan? The PBA plan?
I saw the draft.
No.
And, okay, I'm glad you brought that up. It is not a replacement of the 2002. I want to just very,
Okay,
the 2019 plan, as I understand it, and maybe Kerry could correct me, is an architect's options for some of the town facilities. The 2002 plan was done by, I think, a subcommittee of the Finance Committee about capital planning and permanent building committees in general. And so these two are like, they're apples and oranges, my understanding.
Would you repeat that last thing, Carrie?
These two things are apples and oranges. The 2019 plan does not replace the 2002. And also the final version of the 2019 is not done yet. It's still in draft form and is not posted, I don't believe.
okay. Well, Stephen mentioned at the Finance Committee that it was posted, but I couldn't find it. So,
I haven't seen it either.
so I wanted to send the,
Elise, do you want that plan circulated, the 2019 draft?
that would be good, I think.
Okay.
That would be,
I'll find it and send it around.
thank you. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
that. Yeah.
I'd also like to comment that this was a really good meeting. I feel that we're moving forward really well. Thank you, Elise.
Well, there were lots of support from all members of the committee for putting up information that we could discuss cogently. Very much appreciated. So there, in the 2002, 2003 plan, there are a series of recommendations. And it may be that we'll want to think about those recommendations again. It's often said that these recommendations were not implemented. And that, in fact, our charge says, figure out why they weren't implemented and let us know. I'm not sure that I would agree with that, even though maybe they were not implemented in a systematic way, but many of the projects and components of these recommendations, I think, have been moved forward. So we'll look at that again. And the 2019 plan. All right. What else are we missing? No? Are we good?
Well, I will send the pros and cons around again. And Parashar and anybody else, please add whatever input you can, because I'm sure it's incomplete.
Okay, well, anyone is free to write their pros and cons, and then if you send it to me, I'll be happy to consolidate it into a master list.
All right.
Okay, good. Does anyone feel that we need to continue to investigate best practices in other towns? Or do we think we have adequate sampling of information from towns with and without capital planning committees?
There was some capital planning folks in some other towns that I've spoken to, but haven't had a chance to really interview yet. And so
Okay.
to do that.
All right. Well, that would be good. If you have connections to people who would share their ideas, that'd be helpful to us. Yeah. Hugh, were you saying something there?
I thought we were in. I thought that we had adequate input.
Terrific.
But I'm always willing to hear more.
Thank you. Well, I'm thinking that maybe I will try to write a brief summary of the towns that we have spoken with so that we've got it chronicled somewhere, can easily refer to it.
Sounds like a good idea.
Good idea, right? I, for one, need reiteration all the time. All right, well, great. Thank you very much. You'll see emails from me with homework assignments and and the PowerPoint again. I'll send that around. Okay. Don't be
Okay.
shy. If you have brainstorms, just let me know.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
you, Elise.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks
Bye.
a lot. Stay well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bye.
Thank you all. Take care.